right. Now, I am super excited to introduce Kinia to us. Kinia founded Pros and Babes in Edmonton, Alberta in 2017 because she was looking for groups that really helped moms connect that were focused on their careers. And she saw an absence of that in her area. I'm going to go ahead and just mute Melissa. So she founded Pros and Babes. And, you know, Kinia observed, and we all know and have seen the motherhood penalty, and perhaps it's even more viewed acutely in Canada because of the additional maternity leave. So that's maybe something we'll talk about, but where we see our spouses, our partners, right, continuing to get accolades and the promotions that we are not ourselves always given when we should be given them, right? Even if we are advocating heavily for ourselves. So she talks a lot about the motherhood penalty, and she did experience this, I think, and we'll talk about this. And she has continued to flourish both in her corporate career, and then she left her corporate career to fully dedicate time to Pros and Babes. And Pros and Babes won an Investor's Choice Award in August of 2021. So I just want to take a quick minute to applause, and let's start talking with Kinia.
Thank you so much, Tara. I'm really happy and honored to be here.
We're so glad you're here. So, there's so many questions for you. Let's start with, you know, tell us a little bit about your story. Let's just get a little bit of background. I'm very vocal about the fact that I come from the biotech industry. I'm actually still a heavy leg in the biotech industry. You know, what's your industry, your background, and then a little bit about your kids?
Yes, great questions. I'll start with my two boys. They're 2 and 4, very alive and vivacious. And I was joking at a previous call that they like to eat messy these days. So I'm trying to keep my kitchen table clean, but it's quite difficult to do so. And my background was in corporate communications and investigative journalism and international consulting. So I did quite a bit of that for about a decade. And when I was pregnant with my first boy, and noticing that in the women in leadership circles, we didn't talk a lot about mothers in leadership. In fact, all the events organized were on the dot, where we're putting kids down, where we can't really separate from our babies. And so I wanted to fill that gap. And that's how Pros and Babes was born. And so it was a hobby for a couple of years. During my first maternity leave in Canada, we get to take 12, even 18 months, which is kind of a double-edged sword, because you get to bond with your kids, but you can be completely cut off from your career, and it affects mental health. I see women who have, you know, you go from being in that career, putting on that lipstick, getting out to work, contributing, having routine, to being at home with a baby, no manual, and feeling very isolated. So having those conversations with those women, I started putting this huge vault of resources, and I did all the things that I read about. I had conversations with my manager a week before. I did a proactive back to work plan. You know, I had won awards. I asked the questions, all the shebang. And so I'm going back to work pretty confident that I'm going to really do well. And everything I had negotiated before coming back, the flexible schedule, the part-time job, well, my whole team had changed, from my boss to my colleagues and my portfolio, everything. So I was coming in thinking, I've got this all figured out. I mentored so many women, I'm going to kick butt. And then all of a sudden, boom, nothing was the way I expected it. One day I come into my manager's office. She says, this is full time or no time, you know. And then all of a sudden our meetings disappeared from my calendar. Turns out there was much more at play. It wasn't me, but the monkey in my brain took over. At some point, I thought I was going to get fired, where it was literally her having just typos in how she was writing things. And in the end, there was a lot more at play. So that's my story. I realized that no matter how many diversity and inclusion policies we have and how your employer says that they're open to that, the reality on the ground is that most employers don't have in-depth policies, programs, mentorship, transition plans to help women navigate this transition in their lives. And so it hit me like a ton of bricks. And there was a moment where I realized my ego was starting to get in the way. I was starting to feel like entitled to that support. Whereas I realized, no, I had to take control of my own destiny. And so there was this whole transition period where I was pregnant with my second child. I started growing my business more, taking more accountability, and realizing, okay, I have to be part of the solution, because clearly the problem is not resolved. And that's how this took me to essentially this becoming my full-time occupation and helping other women avoid this, the so-called motherhood penalty, which is real. Financially, it takes place in the form of a wealth gap. So they say that women on average tend to lose over $1 million over their lifetime compared to men, because we take caregiving breaks for younger kids and for older adults, right? So that shapes our career outcomes, our peak earning years. We retire earlier, we live longer. So the compounding effect of not asking for raises, not asking for bonuses, the confidence loss that comes coming back to the office where we feel like we have mother tattooed on our head and that people just see us as that, being treated with kid gloves. Often there are assumptions as to, you're not going to want the promotion, you're not going to want to travel, you're not going to put in the extra hours, which varies very much from person to person. So there's a financial component, and then there's a whole mindset and how you're being managed by others that amounts to this not so attractive term of the motherhood penalty. I like to think that you can turn it into your advantage if you actually acknowledge that you've changed, you bring something different to the table, you need clarity on what you want, and that's how you can start changing the narrative and your outcomes in your favor if you take that awareness. So that's my story and everything I've discovered by having my own kids.
Oh my gosh, there's so much there that I really want to jump into, and so much that we talk about in Power with Co, you know, and talking about the future and what we want to do, right? There's a quote by James Clear that I'm sure I'm going to botch, but you'll get the intention, that, you know, we don't rise to our highest aspirations, we fall to our most basic systems. And to your point about many organizations, yeah, they may have this whole DEI initiative, but they really truly don't have the infrastructure to support. And then there's all the unconscious and conscious biases that also fall into play, right? So you know, true. like you were saying about your manager thinking you might not want to travel or whatnot. And you went back in feeling like you were going to, that you had all the plans laid, right? And you had the rug pulled out from under you. And as we know, organizations change, policies change, things happen. And still, I have to say, at least for me, I know that the transition to being a mom was not easy, right? It still isn't easy. I have a 4 and a 6-year-old, and I like to say that becoming a parent is like self-growth on steroids. Excuse me, it's like self-growth on steroids, right? You are constantly being shown reflections of yourself that you may or may not love. You're being tested in patience. You are constantly, you know, now juggling way more than you ever juggled before. And many of us juggle a lot, and all of a sudden it's compounded. So I think that what you're doing is so amazing, and I'm so glad you're here. And can we just talk for a few minutes about the terminology of work-life balance? And I'll lead by saying that I've always struggled with this. I actually wrote something on LinkedIn earlier this week about the fact that I kind of like mouth choke when I say it, because it just doesn't quite feel right to me. And then recently, Janessa had actually come across something about work-life integration, and that makes so much more sense to me. So tell me what your thoughts are on that. And, you know, maybe we just need to get over the language thing and talk about how we do it. So what do you think?
You know what, language is absolutely critical. And so the starting point for the conversation is actually choosing your words. So for anybody here or watching a replay, number one is you have to get clarity on what you want. And the word matters. So when you choke saying balance, why do we choke? There's been so much debate around work-life balance because it implies a state of perfection. People think balance, I'm a yogi doing, you know, the tree pose and everything is handled properly. Whereas actually I pulled up a sheet recently, I was doing some cleaning, and there was this print of a mother where she had angel wings and 4 extra arms and, you know, kind of the stains in the children. So there's that term balance almost sets us up for failure from the start. It's something unattainable, unachievable, right? That is not helpful. So in our MomBA community in September, we spent time dissecting what that means for every person. And we wrote work life or work family life, however, ... and fill in your blank. And so a couple of favorites were integration. So that kind of, how do you weave together? With a pandemic, that word is almost falling out of favor with some people because, well, it seeps in too much. Right now, there were no boundaries between work and life. Some people really like it. My engineering clients love the term. They find it kind of fits nicely, the pieces of the puzzle. But then somebody pulled up an article that we all love that gave so many other options. So work-life flow, work-life well-being, work-life fulfillment, right? So work-life integration was one of them. And one of the main tasks for the women this month was to actually reflect and discern the word that matters to them, and then make it clear for yourself what that word means, which word inspires, which one feels good. Because if work-life balance feels yucky, well, bye, and some people said work-life balancing, because it's a verb, it's an action and implies being on that tightrope. So that worked for her. I don't know if there were other ones, but the point is choose your word, the one that feels good, and then start fleshing out what that looks like in detail. So we can dive into that a little bit more, Tara, if you want, but first choose your word. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, no, I think that's huge. And I'm sure all of us have a different word, or, from a few, we would choose what resonates the most.
Yeah.
And so I loved integration because it comes from like the Latin integrare, meaning to make whole. And
Yes.
I know, at least, when I was on maternity leave, I loved being there, and I also couldn't wait to get back to work, right? I love what I do. And so for me, this is me being whole when I'm doing both, when I am living my life and adhering to my values and getting an opportunity to make a contribution on a larger scale through work. So that's excellent. So I love that discussion and the thought about the flow and various terminology. And if you can easily access that article, I'd love for us to put a link in for people to have a chance to read that. And then, it sounds like you've done a lot of work with your women in September about work-life balance. So what have been the most important key takeaways from that?
Yes, I love that question. So, and I found the article, so I can post it. In fact, in the chat,
we can do it right after. Sure. Mm-hmm.
And if people want, listening in, they can type in the chat what's the word that inspires them from what
that
they
sounds great.
Flow as well. I think there's work-life flow. That was really nice. And I can see, so there's work-life blend, work-life harmony. I really like harmony. I've also been a musician actually in my past life. And still am, but it's a little bit on the back burner these days. But harmony implies that there's tension and resolution, right, in music, and that's what makes music so beautiful. So I love the term harmony, work-life well-being, work-life flow, work-life fulfillment, work-life, insert your word there. And now going to your question about the big takeaway. So one of the biggest leaps I've seen in my community this year, in our community, that brought so much joy to my heart, is how so many women finally decided to outsource. And there was enormous resistance in the beginning because your finances are strained when you start having a family, and we start thinking very like, what can I budget? What do I need to cut out? Instead of thinking, where do I need to invest to keep my mental health? Where do I need to invest to protect my career? Where do I need to invest to protect my marriage? That's the CEO of your life approach that we like to have, right? So motherhood shouldn't be a contracting force if you're going to be a working mom. If there's one thing I've learned observing the dual career couples in the community working 50, 60 hours a week, is that if you want to have quality of life and not just pay the bills until you die, then you need to have a team. And so people outsource to personal concierges, handyman, personal chefs, all of these, different babysitting services, decluttering services, all of that. And these are people who last year said, well, we're cheap. It's not okay. It wasn't okay in my family to outsource. Growing up, I saw my mom doing it all. So I don't think I should be outsourcing. The breakthroughs, I'm telling you, we have a group chat, and the explosion of joy, like, why didn't I do this sooner? This is amazing. My marriage is so much better. So that's one of the huge things. And it directly relates to mindset and to the idea of being able to receive help, ask for help, accept help. Often we're log jammed and we stay stuck in those excuses, but all it takes is taking action. Try it. If you take somebody for a few weeks to help in your house, it's not a contract for life. And that's going to free up energy and space for you to become creative and perhaps plan that next raise or whatever that is. So just that idea of an expansive mindset, of accepting help, of putting in those support systems and seeing them as an investment on your budget items and not just a cost where, well, I'm going to be so poor, I can't afford it, is one of the key takeaways in that area of work-life integration. Because let's face it, if you're two people working 40, 50, 60 hours per week, do the math. Where do you squeeze in anything else, right? So We
Yeah,
forget to
no,
do the math often when it comes to our personal time.
right. It's so true. And it also alleviates some of the, you know, a lot of times, and I knew this rose for me early on. My husband will do anything that I ask him to do, right? He has no problem being a partner. It's even just the identification of it that sometimes I would get pissy about. Like, why do I have to notice that this needs to get done? When you as a couple agree to outsource, it takes that, just even that identification of it, that mental burden of someone needs to do this. Now I have to ask someone to do it if I'm not going to do it. I mean, maybe it's even just easier because I can't ask nicely right now. You know, all that crap, it just takes some of that off your plate. And you're right. Even if you have the roles where you are setting those boundaries and you're stopping at 40 hours and you're still advancing your career, what do you want to do in the time that you're not at work, right? Do you really want to be cleaning your house or grocery shopping or any of these other things that you can be outsourcing? And the data is out there, and I'll look for this article and provide it as well in the resources for this discussion. But people never regret investing, paying money to have somebody do things like this so that they can free up time. There have been massive surveys done where they've analyzed how people spend and what they spend money on and how they feel about it. And spending money on services that actually improve your quality of life because you can enjoy your weekends with your family, right? They are never services that you regret spending money on. So yeah,
100%.
no, it's a huge mindset shift. And it goes towards, I think it goes to the importance of allowing yourself and shifting your mindset from I don't have enough time to I have time for everything that I prioritize. And there are certain things that I'm going to outsource. And that lack of time mindset can really screw you over in the workplace and in your home life, right?
Yes. And that is an art that I still have to reinvent my relationship with time as I grow in my business, as my role shifts, as I have more staff and learn to delegate. So,
and as your kids grow and need different things, everything shifts. Yeah.
Everything does shift. And it's funny that you should mention that, the time and then the mental burden. So we've done a couple of things. We put together, we've crowdsourced a bunch of information in our community. So we did a whole emotional labor, mental load, and domestic labor master spreadsheet where we've listed everything that goes into operating a family on every single aspect, and then evaluating who does what and whether you're happy with it. So our community, they can go in and, you know, go over that and check everything. One of the big discoveries is often that our partners do a lot more than we thought they did. We often grow resentful. And one of my key stories is my husband's a teacher, and we were talking about this mental load, domestic labor stuff. And I would get so tired of being the project manager and the leader. And he's like, Kinia, do you realize how much emotional labor I perform in our relationship? I listen to you all the time. And that was a huge aha moment and a very humbling moment, because it's true. And I decided, okay, I need to spend way more time with my therapist. My husband spends all day listening to his teenage students' needs, and everybody wants a piece of him. And then he comes home, and because he's such a kind, empathetic being, he also listens to me without essentially drawing any line, because, well, that's who he is. And obviously that's up to him. That's a different can of worms to say it's up to him to draw the boundaries and blah, blah, blah. But it's just to illustrate the fact that often we don't realize how much our partners are doing in terms of managing that. And we also have to become comfortable dropping the ball. So another story, when my first son was born, he was with me all the time, stuck on me all the time, cuddled with me all the time. I would nurse while I peed. I would choose between showering and eating when I was home alone with him. And we had done a session called Baby Proofing Our Marriage before a baby came. We made a list of 5 things we thought we'd argue about and what the solution would be. The number one that was on my list was, I thought I'd get very ticked off by a messy house. But guess what, Tara? Once baby was there and I was dealing with eczema and allergies and just figuring out being a mom, our house got so messy that I would just leave the house for the day, lock the door, and I completely dropped the ball on the order because I couldn't handle it mentally. So one day my husband said, you know, maybe it's time to clean the house. I'll do it. I'm like, fantastic. And since then, it's never been the same. Literally, when we give ourselves permission, or just by default, we drop the ball, they can pick up a lot of the stuff that we guard so heavily and that we want to do just because, you know, I'm the best. I'm the only one who can take care of the baby. I'm the only one who can clean the house in the right way. So often we stand in our own way of others helping us because we do not create the space for others to pick up the ball that we've dropped. So another big aha moment.
It's a huge aha moment. And this is one of the reasons why I say that becoming a parent is like self-growth on steroids, right? This is the type of thing that not only is true in our personal lives, but it transcends into our business lives as well, right? If we think about our teams and maybe what we have our teams working on, and maybe you know that person's going to write that report, but it's not going to be quite as good as you would have written the report. Do you pull it back? You know, that's a very easy example to call and to call upon, but I'm sure we can all think about things in both our personal lives and our working lives where we own too much. And as a result, we then don't have the time to carve out to be strategic. We don't have the time to carve out to plan that next promotion, that increased level of responsibility that we want. In order to elevate yourself, right, in business, in the same way, in order to elevate yourself in your personal life, you have to let go of some of this stuff. And some of it's going to be dropped. But the more that we can consciously drop something and drop it in the location we want and let go of it, the better off we're going to be. So I love that example. And I think it transcends, you know, personal and our business lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. And just makes me think how much more space I want to create in my life in the next year, and how I've already put a bunch of those spaces in my calendar. In fact, when it comes to work-life integration, I've been reflecting on what is my rich life. I don't know if you came across that podcast. It was Tim Ferriss and Ramit Sethi, and it was about money and relationships. And he encouraged listeners to really sit down and talk with their partners about what would be their rich life. And so I was thinking in my business, what would feel rewarding? Because just having X amount of dollars in my bank account doesn't particularly excite me. But I thought, you know what, working in a different space for a month, or even taking a whole month off in the summer, would be fantastic. And so this weekend we booked 4.5 weeks in Costa Rica, in a beautiful place by the sea with a pool and a creek, and my whole family, me and my mother-in-law and my mom. And it started with a thought that would be my rich life. It's planned 10 months out in advance. And now I'm going to organize everything around that so I can completely disconnect. So it goes back to the first question. What do you want? What does work-life integration look like for you? And you have to examine that in great detail. So start with a word, but think of your ideal schedule. How many hours are you working? What is that space that you need to create for quiet, for rest, for rejuvenation? Because women like you, me, anybody on the call today, I think we're probably wired to be go, 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 do all the time. And nobody's going to take that rest for you if you don't decide to do it, right? And so it starts with that. It starts with, first of all, identifying that you want that work-life integration, flow, balance, whatever. And then actually having your calendar reflect that for you and build it. I always say, build it into the future. For moms, there's this huge pressure of, okay, I want a time block for next week. Get me started. I'm like, you know what? Do it for the period that starts in 3 months. Start dreaming. I'll show on my calendar. You're going to see some of my best, but that's okay. You see my calendars on the wall. I did this time planning for September back in May. I reworked my dream calendar rules a couple of times, and I gave myself time to grow into this new person I want to become, into one who has a more integrated life, or one that takes more pauses in her life. So envision it, and then put in your calendar and kind of drop all the excuses in the middle between that. Just do it and have faith that you will find the solutions to get you there, right?
No, I love that. I think that's so great. I'm recognizing that we have so quickly talked through 26 minutes. It's just so easy to talk to you about this, but I want to open it up. I want to see if there are any questions from the group. Janessa, I want to see if there are any questions coming in from the Facebook group as well. So let's just pause, and anybody that has a question, please jump in.
Yeah, I'm looking at the comments too. I'm seeing, I love work-life fulfillment. We can explore that. Integration and harmony seem the most appropriate words to use for work life in my personal experience. So if there are no questions too, I'd love to hear why people chose those words, why they resonate.
Yeah, sure. That's great. So Janessa, do we have any questions in the Facebook group?
No, there's no questions yet.
Nothing coming in yet. Okay. Definitely, if you're watching this later, hit us up with some questions we want to hear. And then, Lisa, may I go ahead and just talk and ask you to speak about integration and harmony? Lisa, you're still on mute. Maybe it's a tough time right now. So Melissa, how about you loving work-life fulfillment? This is to Melissa Marrero.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think if anything's become very clear for me this past year and a half or so, it's really learning to feel whether or not I'm being fulfilled by my activities. And I don't know, I think there's a lot of room for me to grow in terms of how fulfilled I feel when I think about what I do and what I can be doing, what I would like to be doing, and sort of prioritizing my time in a way that makes me feel more fulfilled in general. So I just think that's an appropriate word for me, because there has been, I think, recognition of sort of a lack of fulfillment for a lot of people these past couple of years. We've been faced with, for me, not separating home and work very effectively. Even though I've been working remotely for 16 years, all of a sudden my kids are schooling at home, and that added a whole nother element. My partner in life, he was an essential worker, so he wasn't here during the day for me to have somebody I could sort of tag out with. Yeah. And for me, fulfillment is something that hits home, especially with the introspection that's been sort of thrust upon me these past year and a half.
Thank you for sharing. Is it something that you wrote down during the call and you want to make visible and perhaps link a question to it? Where am I feeling fulfilled today? Where can I seek more fulfillment in everything I'm doing? And how can I invent a more fulfilled future? How does that sit with you?
Yeah, I think that's something I probably have to think a little more deeply about. But just my first initial thoughts on that are really, I keep thinking about some of the things that you talked about, Tara, in terms of, when you ask your husband to do things, he kind of does, but that idea that you need to point it out or you need to ask, I think maybe I need to have a little bit better communication at home so that it's more of a less contention and less stressful. And maybe I need to also recognize that when I'm getting frustrated, my partner is carrying a lot of that mental burden listening to me. So yeah, that's kind of what stands out for me is how can I communicate a little bit better so that it's less stressful for him to hear me, and so I feel less in terms of needing to ask him when something to me seems so obvious.
Yes, absolutely.
And even, Kinia, your suggestion about having a question, how am I fulfilled today? How am I feeling fulfilled today? Being intentional about thinking about that on a regular basis, on a daily basis, helps us to call upon the values that are most important to us, to be making the decisions that help us to feel fulfilled, right? Our attention goes where, or our energy goes where our attention goes, right? And so if we are paying attention to whether or not we're feeling fulfilled, rather than just going through the rote actions of life, working and parenting and being in a relationship, right? When you're really intentional about if those are fulfilling you, and if not, why? And if they're not, what can you change? If they are, what can you do more of to feel more of that fulfillment? That intention around work-life fulfillment can really help position the way that you look at it day in and day out, and then ultimately change the way that you're experiencing it.
Yes, and I thank you. And I like the comment about the mental load and mental burden, because it makes me realize it was a journey for our family, and it's also a journey for the women in our community. The way we get things unblocked for people is starting a values conversation with themselves and then their partners. So one of the first things we do when people start working in our community is do a values assessment.
We do
too. Right? Yes, you do too. It's a very foundational piece in any progress or coaching pathway. And then sitting down and seeing if you and your partner are sharing the same values. So for some people, it's the same. For others, they're actually different. And that opens up a whole pathway of discussions where how do we honor both sets of values? How do we make both happen? And then ultimately creating space. We are in such a go, go, go culture that we tend to get extremely disconnected from those reflections and those desires. And one of the first things I say to women, if you're going back to maternity leave, put at least one day quarterly in your calendar where you're out of the picture. You're at the spa, you're on your own, ideally a weekend, because the first times our bodies just crash. Our bodies just crash. We're just, the first time you have the opportunity to actually spend time with yourself and you think you have these, I remember last November, I went to a spa and I had my journals and I was in the mountains for 2 nights and I thought I'd be doing all this journaling on worksheets. You know what happened? I went to the spa and both nights I crashed at 7 p.m. and my body just needed to recover. So if we spend such a long time being mothers and workers and trying to be sexy lovers and, running the household, our bodies are just in this constant state of stress and kind of adrenaline rush, and we become addicted to the stress. So to even answer those questions, it can be a journey to create space in your body to actually answer the question, like, what fulfills me? So if you're embarking on that journey, I would encourage you to be patient and carve out the time, even in 3 months and 6 months. If you feel like you can't do it today, how can you make it happen in 3 to 6 months? How can you align the support resources? Because until you have time to be with you, you won't really find the answers, right? You'll just be on those autopilot modes of what you're expected to be as a mother, as a worker. And before you know it, another day has gone by and you just repeat the loop over and over again.
You're so right. You're so right. And I love blocking that time far in advance, because a lot of times it does require some logistical jungle gymming, right? You need to get the right resources in place and you need to be able to do that. But yeah, it's really critical that we do that. So one last question before we conclude. Why do so many women, why do so many women feel guilty about spending time alone, and how do we get over that guilt? Because it's so important that we do, right?
That's a really interesting question. It has been explored in so many spaces. Historically, I think our role as women in society, we're seen as the caregivers, and we had to do a lot of things to feel safe and cared for. So it's deeply coded in our DNA to take care of others, to nurture them, to give life. And even stepping away and taking care of yourself might feel like it's against your own survival, literally, right? I think there's Tara Moore is one of the mentors that I really liked in the beginning of my personal growth journey. And so she talks about that good girl, people pleasing, not standing out. It's actually historically wired in our nervous system. And so when we take time away, it feels threatening to our own survival. So in a nutshell, I would say it's the programming, it's the unexamined life, it's kind of the patterns. And also giving life is so powerful. You're protecting, you're nurturing those little babies that you feel so close to. So I think it triggers all of these behavioral patterns. And that's why we feel guilty. There's programming, there's things we picked up from our own mothers about what it means to be a good mother. All those stories left unexamined. And guilt can be information about your values, about what matters to you. So I would say acknowledge it, get curious, as you mentioned, and dare to explore differently. There really is, I would say there is no other way but to try another way. Like, if it's hard for you, then block that time in 3 to 6 months, get curious, keep on repeating it, and ask yourself, do I want to feel a life? Do I want to live a life filled with guilt? Is that making me a great mom? Is it making me a great worker? Is it improving my relationship with myself to seep and sit in this guilt? How is this making the world a better place and helping me live a more fulfilled life? Right? So get curious, ask the good questions, and dare to choose other programming and to connect really with yourself and not what others want you to be as a mom, as a professional, as a wife.
Or what you think you need to do as those things. It's so true. And dare I even say, if we acknowledge the historical and societal factors that have fed into this, in addition to our own, generational wounds that we've inherited, it's also incumbent upon us to show the next generation something different. And we only start to do that by taking that time and showing them that we can take that time, we can be fulfilled, and we can still be incredible mothers and have incredible leadership careers. So Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, Kinia. Where can the women watching this find more of you? Talk to us about what you've got going on and Pros and Babes and more info on you.
Absolutely. So we have a Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/pros and babes. So I can type it in the comments or pass it on. That's where we also have a live show like this. We have a summit coming up, the Flow, Ease, and Rejuvenation Summit. So wonderful speakers from our joint community, Tara. So we're talking about, well, intimacy in marriage. We're talking about healing your scars and so much good stuff. Honestly, I'm trying to think 7 speakers, but they're all fantastic. So events.prosandbabes.com. I'll mention those 2 things essentially, not
Great.
frozen babes. Sometimes Siri changes it to frozen babes, so like professionals and babies. So, and my name is quite unique. It's easy to find. Thank you for asking. I would love to connect with
Yes,
all of you.
wonderful.